Chapter 1. You're invisible right now, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it literally. You walk into rooms and nothing about you forces a second look. Not because you're lacking substance, not because you're dumb or boring or empty, but because none of what you are inside is making it outside. And the world doesn't reward what it can't see. It doesn't pause for what it has to imagine. It doesn't give credit for things it has to guess. That's the part people hate hearing, because it feels unfair. But unfair doesn't make it untrue. You keep telling yourself that if someone really got to know you, they'd see it. If she spent enough time with you, she'd understand your depth, your intelligence, your discipline, the way you think 10 steps ahead. You believe it would just take time. And maybe you're right. Maybe if someone followed you around for years, watched how your mind works, saw how you move when no one's looking, they'd eventually piece together who you are. But here's the problem. Nobody is signing up for that discovery process. Nobody is volunteering to excavate your value. People respond to what presents itself clearly and confidently in front of them. This is where men get stuck. They confuse being with being seen. You can be all the things you say you are and still be functionally irrelevant to the outside world. You can be brilliant and unnoticed. You can be disciplined and overlooked. You can be solid and ignored. And it's not because the world is shallow. It's because the world is busy. Everyone is making snap judgments based on what's observable, because that's all anyone has time for. Expecting people to slow down and investigate your inner life before you've given them a reason is entitlement disguised as humility. You wouldn't accept this logic anywhere else in your life. You wouldn't walk into a job interview wearing sweatpants and say, "Trust me, I'm competent." You wouldn't launch a business with no branding, no proof, no presence, and say, "If people just give me a chance, they'll see how good it is." You understand intuitively that presentation matters, that visibility matters, that credibility has to be demonstrated, not declared. But when it comes to attraction, especially with women, you suddenly expect the rules to change. You expect her to sense something special without you giving her anything concrete to sense. Here's the uncomfortable part. If she doesn't notice you, that doesn't mean she rejected you. It means you never entered the conversation. You weren't evaluated and found lacking. You weren't even evaluated. And that's worse, because rejection at least implies presence. Being ignored means you never made the cut to begin with. And before you start blaming genetics or luck or timing, understand this. Plenty of men who aren't exceptional on paper still get attention because they understand how to make their value legible. They understand how to campaign themselves without talking. They let their life speak before their mouth ever opens. You keep hearing guys talk. Everyone's talking. Everyone's saying they're focused, they're grinding, they're different, they're him. It's cheap now. Words don't cost anything. Anybody can describe an identity they haven't built. Anybody can narrate a future they haven't earned. And women know this. They've heard it all. They don't need to call it out. They just quietly stop listening. They watch instead. They watch how you live, how you carry yourself, how your life looks when no one's selling it. That's the filter. And if what they see doesn't align with what they hear, the hearing shuts off completely. This is why potential doesn't attract. Potential is invisible. Potential is theoretical. Potential requires faith. And attraction doesn't run on faith. It runs on evidence. Not loud evidence, not flashy evidence, consistent evidence, the kind that doesn't need explanation, the kind that doesn't need defending, the kind that makes someone say, "Even if I'm not sure about him yet, I'd be stupid not to at least look closer." If you're not creating that reaction, you're not doing your job. And yes, it is your job. No one else is responsible for making you visible. I know some of you are bristling right now. You're thinking this sounds like performance, like pretending, like selling out. It's not. There's a difference between lying and translating, between faking and packaging. You're not inventing value. You're making existing value obvious. If you refuse to do that, you're not being authentic. You're being lazy with your own potential. You're hoarding your best qualities in private and then resenting the world for not rewarding what it never saw. Let me put it in terms that hit closer. Think about how you judge other men instantly without knowing them. You see how they dress, how they move, how they speak, what they're doing with their time. You make assumptions immediately. You don't wait to discover their inner genius. You don't assume depth until it's demonstrated. You respond to what's in front of you. Women do the same thing. The only difference is you forgive yourself for it and condemn them for it. That double standard is costing you more than you realize. There was a guy I used to see at the same coffee shop every morning. Same time, same place. He never spoke much, didn't try to be seen. Hoodie, slouched posture, eyes always down. I didn't think much of him at all. One day, he walks in different. Clean haircut, fitted clothes, calm posture, laptop open with real work on the screen. Not performative, just intentional. The energy shifted immediately. People noticed. Conversations happened without him initiating them. Same person, same mind, same capability, different presentation. And suddenly, the world responded. Not because he changed who he was, but because he stopped hiding it behind indifference. That's what most of you are doing. Hiding behind indifference, calling it humility, calling it not caring, calling it being above the superficial stuff. But deep down, you care. You care a lot. You care enough to be frustrated. You care enough to watch videos like this. You care enough to feel overlooked. The problem isn't caring. The problem is pretending you don't while doing nothing to change the outcome. If this is landing, if you're feeling that uncomfortable recognition, like the video right now, not because you agree with everything, but because something in you knows this is pointing at a blind spot you've been avoiding. You don't need a woman to read your mind. You don't need her to intuit your brilliance. You need to make it undeniable that engaging with you is worth her time. And that doesn't come from telling her who you are. It comes from building a life that reflects it. When your exterior contradicts your interior, the exterior wins every time. Not because it's more important, but because it's all anyone can see. This is where the campaign analogy matters. Every man is campaigning whether he realizes it or not. Your habits are campaigning. Your environment is campaigning. Your body is campaigning. Your schedule is campaigning. Silence is campaigning. Neglect is campaigning. You're always sending a message. The only question is whether that message matches who you think you are. If it doesn't, the world believes the message, not the intention behind it, and don't get it twisted. This isn't about peacocking or flexing or chasing validation. It's about alignment. It's about making sure that when someone looks at you, what they see doesn't require imagination. They don't have to squint to find your value. They don't have to give you the benefit of the doubt. It's right there, calm, grounded, obvious. And when that's in place, you stop needing to convince anyone of anything. If you've ever felt like people underestimate you, like they don't take you seriously until much later, like you're always having to prove yourself after the fact, that's not bad luck. That's a visibility problem. And visibility is solvable. But only if you're willing to accept that the world isn't obligated to dig for what you refuse to display. That's not cruelty. That's reality. Sit with that. Let it bother you a little. If you're still here, still listening instead of getting defensive and clicking away, subscribe. Not because you need motivation, but because this conversation doesn't get easier. It gets more precise. And precision is what finally turns frustration into progress. Chapter 2. You want people to assume things about you without you giving them anything to assume from. That's the quiet contradiction most men never say out loud. You want the benefit of the doubt without offering any visible evidence that you deserve it. You want someone to feel your seriousness, your ambition, your intelligence, your edge, while you move through the world looking interchangeable. And when that doesn't happen, you call it shallow. You call it unfair. You call it society being broken. But what you're really reacting to is the gap between who you believe you are and what your life is actually communicating. You keep thinking value announces itself automatically. Like if you just exist long enough, someone will notice. Like substance emits some invisible signal that cuts through noise on its own. But look around. Everyone is noisy. Everyone has an inner monologue where they're the main character. Nobody is scanning the room trying to discover hidden gems. They're responding to what presents itself clearly and confidently. If you don't present, you don't register. And not registering isn't an insult. It's a natural outcome. This is where men get confused about humility. They think staying understated makes them noble. They think refusing to package themselves means they're above the game. They think not caring is strength. But there's a difference between humility and neglect. Humility is quiet confidence. Neglect is leaving your value buried and resenting people for not excavating it. One is grounded, the other is passive. And passive men don't get chosen. They get overlooked, then angry about it later in private. You don't need to shout who you are, but you do need to signal it. Signals are how humans navigate complexity quickly. You already rely on them every day. You read rooms instantly. You assess people before they speak. You make judgments off posture, tone, grooming, consistency, follow-through. You trust those judgments because they're usually right enough to act on. Women do the same thing. And when you pretend you don't, you're lying to yourself to avoid responsibility for how you're showing up. Think about the phrase, "she should just see me." That sentence hides entitlement. It assumes your internal world deserves external recognition without translation. But no one owes you that effort. Translation is your job. If your mind is sharp, your life should look sharp. If you're disciplined, your body and schedule should reflect it. If you're ambitious, your environment should carry that energy. When those things don't match, people don't assume hidden depth. They assume the visible story is the real one. And here's the part that stings. When your exterior doesn't match your interior, people don't think you're deep. They think you're average, or worse, they think you're delusional. Because everyone says they're different. Everyone says they have plans. Everyone says they're focused. Talk is cheap because it's everywhere. What isn't cheap is congruence. When what you say lines up with what you live, when there's no gap to explain away, that's when people lean in without you asking them to. You might be thinking this sounds like branding, like self-marketing, like playing a role. But you already play roles. You just don't control them. If you don't choose how you're perceived, other people will choose for you. And they won't be charitable. They'll be efficient. They'll assume you are what you look like, what you do repeatedly, how you treat yourself. And once that assumption sets in, it's very hard to undo with words alone. There's a reason men who are actually about something don't talk much about it. They don't need to. Their life speaks first. Their body speaks first. Their pace speaks first. Their boundaries speak first. When they open their mouth, it's just confirmation. When you don't have that foundation, talking becomes compensation, and people can feel compensation immediately. It feels needy even when it's confident. It feels performative even when it's calm. Because the signal underneath doesn't match the sound. This is why women don't respond to men who explain themselves. The moment you start narrating who you are instead of letting it be observed, something collapses. You turn attraction into a presentation. You shift from being experienced to being evaluated. And once someone is evaluating you, you've already lost the energy you needed to hold their attention. Attention wants to discover, not be instructed. I've seen this play out in rooms where nothing was said. A man walks in late, not rushed, not apologetic. He doesn't scan the room for approval. He takes up space naturally. His clothes fit, his posture is settled, he looks like his life is moving somewhere, even if no one knows where yet. Women notice. Not because he's loud, not because he's handsome, because his exterior answers questions before they're asked. Is this man competent? Is he grounded? Is he worth paying attention to? Those questions get answered silently in seconds. That's not manipulation. That's alignment. Now contrast that with the guy who tells you he's focused but sleeps until noon, who says he's disciplined but looks like he doesn't train anything, who talks about his vision but has no structure in his day. You don't believe him, even if you want to, even if he's sincere, because sincerity doesn't override inconsistency, and women aren't cruel for responding the same way. They're rational. This is where the "don't sell the dream" line matters. Selling the dream is what men do when the reality isn't there yet. They talk about who they're becoming instead of who they are. They describe futures instead of demonstrating trajectories. They want credit for intention. But intention doesn't create attraction. Direction does. Motion does. Evidence does. Even small evidence beats big talk every time. You don't need to be finished. You don't need to be rich or perfect or elite. You need to be moving in a way that's visible. You need to make it hard for someone to dismiss you without curiosity. Not because you demand attention, but because your presence creates friction. Friction makes people look twice. Friction interrupts autopilot, and autopilot is where you're losing right now. A lot of men misunderstand this and think the answer is flash. It's not. Flash repels as often as it attracts. What works is coherence, when your body, your environment, your habits, and your words tell the same story. When nothing feels exaggerated, when nothing feels hidden, when there's no obvious disconnect. That's what makes someone say, "I don't know exactly who he is yet, but I know there's something there." That's the door you want open. If you've ever felt like people talk over you, overlook you, underestimate you until they get to know you, that's not bad luck. That's delayed credibility. And delayed credibility is the cost of poor signaling. You pay it in missed opportunities, in being passed over, in having to over-explain later. Fixing that isn't about ego, it's about efficiency. It's about respecting your own time enough to stop relying on chance encounters to reveal who you are. Here's a story that might sting because it's simple. A man I knew kept complaining that women never took him seriously. Smart guy. Well-read, ambitious, always had opinions, but his life looked paused. Same job he hated, same routines, same clothes he'd had for years. He talked like a man going somewhere, but lived like a man waiting. One year, he didn't talk. He changed his schedule, changed his body, changed his environment, not dramatically, intentionally. When women started responding differently, he was shocked. He said, "I didn't change who I am." And that was true. He changed what was visible. And that changed everything. If you're hearing this and thinking it sounds like work, it is. And it should be. Visibility costs effort. Alignment costs effort. But that effort compounds instead of evaporates. You stop needing to convince. You stop needing to chase. You stop needing to hope someone looks deeper. They already see enough to be interested. The rest gets discovered naturally, the way it's supposed to. Chapter 3. You don't actually want to be seen. That's the part nobody admits. You want the reward of being seen without the vulnerability of exposure. You want recognition without risk. You want attraction without the possibility of rejection. And hiding behind the idea that they just don't see me lets you avoid the one thing that would force a verdict. Because once you make yourself obvious, once you make your value legible, people get to respond honestly. And honesty is scarier than invisibility when you're not fully anchored in yourself yet. Think about how safe it is to stay ambiguous. If no one reacts strongly to you, you can tell yourself it's because they didn't understand you. If women pass you over, you can say they didn't look deep enough. If opportunities don't come, you can believe they missed your potential. Ambiguity protects your ego. It keeps the story intact. The moment you sharpen your exterior, the moment you step into visibility, the excuses evaporate. Now the response reflects reality, not imagination. And that's the moment most men unconsciously avoid. This is why so many men stay almost. almost in shape, almost disciplined, almost put together, almost impressive, almost ready, almost visible, almost is comfortable because it keeps the outcome unresolved. You can live in the idea of who you are instead of the proof of it. But the cost of almost is that nobody responds to it. Almost doesn't interrupt anyone's attention. Almost doesn't demand curiosity. Almost blends into the background and then complains about being ignored. You don't need to scream. You don't need to posture. You don't need to perform masculinity like it's a costume. What you need is commitment to coherence, the willingness to let your life speak clearly, even if it speaks imperfectly. Even if it says, I'm not finished, but I'm moving. I'm not at the top, but I'm climbing. I'm not exceptional yet, but I'm disciplined enough that ignoring me feels negligent. That's the energy that creates gravity, not claims, not vibes, direction. Men underestimate how much direction alone changes perception. A man with a clear direction but modest resources commands more attention than a man with resources and no direction. Because direction signals future. It signals momentum. It signals that today isn't the peak, and women are not attracted to static men, no matter how deep they think they are. Stagnation kills curiosity. Motion creates it. You can feel this in yourself when you meet another man. You don't need to know his bank account. You don't need his resume. You sense whether his life is moving or stalled. You pick up on it immediately. His energy either feels like it's going somewhere or like it's circling. Women feel that too. They just don't explain it the way men want them to. They respond, or they don't. And their response is data, not an insult. A lot of you are still waiting to be chosen before you choose yourselves. You're waiting for validation to justify effort. You're waiting for interest to justify investment. You're waiting for a woman to see your brilliance so you finally feel permitted to show it. That's backwards. The men who get chosen are the ones who chose themselves loudly enough that others had no choice but to notice. Not arrogantly, not obnoxiously, decisively. Here's where it gets uncomfortable again. If you truly believed in your own value, you wouldn't hide it behind neglect. You wouldn't dress like you don't care and then resent people for taking you at face value. You wouldn't live casually and expect people to assume intensity underneath. You wouldn't move without intention and then feel offended when no one detects intention. Belief shows up in behavior. Always. And when behavior contradicts belief, people trust behavior. This is why the campaign yourself idea matters so much. Campaigning isn't lying. It's not hype. It's not selling dreams. Campaigning is making sure the clearest story about you is the true one. It's refusing to let randomness define perception. It's understanding that silence is not neutrality. Silence is a message. Neglect is a message. Disorganization is a message. And if you don't choose your message, the default one gets sent for you. There's a difference between humility and hiding. Humility says, I don't need to dominate the room. Hiding says, I don't want to be evaluated. One is strength. The other is fear, dressed up as virtue. And fear has a smell to it, not panic, avoidance. People sense it even when they can't articulate it. They don't say, this man is afraid. They say, something's missing, something's off. I'm not curious enough to lean in. You've probably had moments where you finally showed up differently and felt the shift immediately. You wore something intentional. You stood straighter. You spoke slower. You stopped over-explaining. And suddenly, people responded differently. Not because you became someone else, but because you stopped diluting yourself. Those moments weren't accidents. They were glimpses of alignment. And the frustration you felt afterward, when things went back to normal, came from knowing you could live there permanently if you chose to. Here's a story that doesn't sound dramatic, but it's honest. I watched a man change how he was treated simply by changing when he woke up. That's it. Same job, same income, same face. He stopped waking up late, started moving earlier. His schedule tightened, his pace changed, his availability changed. People around him started responding differently without him announcing anything. Women noticed, men noticed, opportunities noticed. Because discipline leaks into everything, and discipline is visible long before success is. You don't need perfection. You need signals. Signals that say this man takes himself seriously. Signals that say this man is in motion. Signals that say engaging with him is not a waste of time. When those signals are present, people do the rest of the work for you. They fill in the blanks positively. When those signals are absent, no amount of inner brilliance saves you. It stays trapped where only you can admire it. A lot of men are angry at women for not seeing them, when what they're really angry about is that women respond to reality instead of intention. But that's not cruelty. That's sanity. Imagine if people treated you based on who they hoped you were instead of what you showed them. Life would be chaos. Standards exist to filter. Attraction is a filter, and if you don't pass it, the answer isn't resentment, it's adjustment. If this chapter feels heavier than the last, that's because it's getting closer to responsibility. Responsibility is where excuses die. And I know some of you are thinking, so what? I have to perform just to be noticed. No, you have to participate. There's a difference. Participation means engaging reality as it is instead of wishing it were different. Participation means accepting that visibility precedes recognition. Always has, always will. You don't owe anyone a performance, but you do owe yourself coherence. You owe it to yourself to let the world see something worth responding to instead of asking it to imagine it. And once you do that, something interesting happens. You stop needing validation so badly because you're no longer hiding. You're no longer hoping. You're standing in something real. And real creates its own gravity. Chapter 4. You don't fix this by trying harder to be liked. That's the instinct that keeps men trapped. You don't fix invisibility by chasing attention. You fix it by becoming harder to dismiss. There's a difference. One is needy. The other is structural. One asks the world to respond. The other changes the conditions under which the world responds whether it wants to or not. Most men hear, make your exterior match your interior, and immediately think surface, clothes, hair, status, flash. That's not what actually does the work. Those things can help, but they're not the engine. The engine is friction. The feeling that interacting with you costs something emotionally. Because you're not malleable. You're not easily impressed. You're not endlessly available. You're not desperate to be understood. You're moving with intent, and intent creates resistance. Resistance creates curiosity. Curiosity creates attention. You've felt this before when you walked into a room already late for something important. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You weren't selling anything. You were focused. You were directional. And people responded differently. Conversations shortened. Questions sharpened. Interest increased. Not because you changed who you were, but because your life was clearly happening whether anyone approved or not. That's the difference between being present and being performative. Presence doesn't ask permission. It doesn't explain itself. It just exists, solid and inconvenient to ignore. Here's where men sabotage themselves again. They wait to be ready. They wait to have the body first, the money first, the confidence first, the perfect alignment first. But readiness is a luxury for people who don't understand how momentum works. Momentum creates readiness, not the other way around. The men who get noticed aren't the ones who finish the journey. They're the ones visibly on it, moving, adjusting, progressing in public, not bragging, not announcing, just being obviously in motion. Think about how many men you know who talk endlessly about plans, but never seem to be anywhere different year to year. Same energy, same excuses, same environment, same complaints. They're invisible, not because they lack intelligence, but because there's no evidence of trajectory. Their life looks paused. And paused lives don't attract curiosity. They attract sympathy at best, indifference at worst. Women don't lean into paused energy. They don't want to be the spark that ignites a man. They want to step into a fire that's already burning. This is where the "don't sell the dream" line becomes real. Selling the dream is asking someone to invest emotionally in a future that doesn't yet exist. It's saying, "Trust me," without giving them a reason to. And that works only on people who are also lost or desperate. Healthy women don't buy dreams. They observe patterns. They look at how you live now and extrapolate forward. If today looks disorganized, tomorrow doesn't look promising, no matter how beautiful the vision sounds. You can test this brutally honestly in your own life. Look at the men women talk about with excitement. Not admiration. Excitement. It's never just about looks. It's about how their life feels in motion, how busy they are without seeming overwhelmed, how selective they are with their time, how little they need validation. That doesn't come from affirmations. It comes from structure, from discipline, from habits that force your exterior to reflect your internal standards, whether you feel like it that day or not. There's a moment that happens when you stop trying to be impressive and start trying to be consistent. Your nervous system changes. You stop scanning for reactions. You stop overcorrecting. You stop narrating yourself. And people feel that calm as confidence, not the loud kind, the grounded kind, the kind that doesn't ask, "Do you see me?" The kind that assumes you will if you're paying attention, and if you don't, it doesn't collapse. That's power. A lot of you think campaigning yourself means chasing women. It doesn't. It means building a life that speaks so clearly that women self-select into curiosity. It means that even a woman who isn't attracted to you initially feels a subtle pull to understand you better, because something about you doesn't add up in a good way. There's coherence, there's direction, there's friction. And friction is magnetic because it interrupts boredom. Here's a small example that matters more than it sounds. When you clean your environment, not for guests, but because disorder bothers you, that shows. When you keep your word to yourself about small things, that shows. When your schedule has structure instead of chaos, that shows. When you train your body even when no one is watching, that shows. None of this is loud, none of it is flashy, but together it creates a presence that doesn't need explanation. People feel it before they can articulate it. You've probably met men who didn't say much, but somehow set the tone of the room. They weren't dominating, they weren't peacocking, they were just settled. They didn't rush, they didn't fidget, they didn't chase energy. And everyone adjusted around them. That's not genetics. That's alignment. That's a man whose exterior stopped betraying his interior. And once that happens, attention stops feeling like something you need to earn. It becomes a byproduct of how you move. This is also why men who try to shortcut this fail so hard. The ones who buy status symbols without building discipline. The ones who mimic confidence without building consistency. The ones who talk like leaders but live like followers. Their exterior becomes loud but hollow. And hollow is worse than invisible because it invites scrutiny and collapses under it. If you're going to be seen, you have to be solid enough to hold attention without crumbling. That takes time, but it's time spent in the right direction. If you've ever felt like people change their behavior around you only after they find out what you're about, that means your signals are delayed, and delayed signals cost you opportunities. You shouldn't need a reveal. You shouldn't need context. You shouldn't need an explanation arc. The moment someone interacts with you, there should be enough there to justify curiosity, not obsession. Curiosity. That's the door everything else walks through. This is the pressure point most men resist, the idea that you are responsible for how clearly your value is communicated. Not with words, with reality. That responsibility feels heavy because it removes excuses. You can't blame shallow people if you never gave them depth to see. You can't blame timing if your life looks static. You can't blame misunderstanding if your signals are weak. That doesn't mean you're deficient. It means you're underdeveloped in a skill no one taught you mattered. If you're feeling that mix of motivation and irritation right now, that's good. Irritation means something inside you knows this applies. Motivation means you're ready to do something with it. Share this video with someone who keeps saying, "I know I'm better than this." Knowing isn't enough. Showing is what changes outcomes. And if you want to keep pushing this perspective until it turns into behavior instead of insight, stay with the channel. The last chapter is where this stops being conceptual and starts becoming unavoidable. Chapter 5. You don't arrive at this realization with fireworks. It doesn't feel victorious. It feels sobering, like realizing you've been asking the wrong question the whole time. Not why don't they see me, but why haven't I made myself impossible to misunderstand? And once that question lands, you can't unhear it. It follows you into how you wake up, how you dress, how you move, how you spend your time. It forces a level of honesty most men avoid because it removes the comfort of ambiguity. You start noticing how often you've relied on explanation instead of evidence. How many times you've wanted someone to just give you a chance. How often you've believed that being patient and waiting would eventually pay off. And the uncomfortable truth surfaces slowly. Waiting was never patience. It was avoidance. It was postponing the moment where reality would give you feedback you couldn't talk your way around. Because once your exterior matches your interior, the feedback becomes immediate and unfiltered. People either respond or they don't, and that clarity is terrifying if your sense of worth is still fragile. This is where real confidence finally separates itself from performance. Performance needs reaction. Performance collapses when it's ignored. Confidence doesn't. Confidence is built on alignment, not applause. When your habits, body, environment, and direction reflect who you believe yourself to be, you don't need anyone to validate it. Their response becomes information, not identity. And that shift alone changes how you carry yourself. You stop chasing signals. You stop narrating yourself. You stop trying to be understood. You simply move and let understanding catch up or not. What most men don't realize is that making yourself undeniable isn't about forcing attraction. It's about removing friction between truth and perception. It's about making sure that the fastest read someone gets of you isn't wrong. Because people will read you quickly whether you like it or not. You don't get to opt out of that process. You only get to influence it. And if you don't influence it intentionally, randomness does it for you. Randomness decides who notices you. Randomness decides who takes you seriously. Randomness decides whether you get overlooked. That's not humility. That's negligence. There's a point where you stop asking women to guess that you're him. You stop hoping they intuit your edge. You stop believing that being misunderstood is proof of depth. Instead, you take responsibility for clarity. You make it obvious that engaging with you is worth attention, even if it doesn't lead anywhere. Not because you demand interest, but because ignoring you now requires effort. And effort is something people don't waste unless there's something there. You see the same principle play out everywhere once you're honest enough to look. The men who command rooms don't announce themselves. They don't sell futures. They don't explain their worth. Their presence resolves questions before they're asked. Their life has weight. Their pace has intention. Their choices signal standards. And people respond to that instinctively, not intellectually. That's the level you're aiming for. Not dominance, not approval, legibility. At some point, you'll notice something else shift. You'll stop feeling the need to prove anything to women who don't respond. You won't feel angry or dismissed. You'll feel indifferent in a clean way. Because once you're aligned, rejection doesn't feel personal. It feels logistical. It feels like paths crossing or not crossing. And that emotional neutrality is something women feel immediately. It's what makes attraction possible in the first place. Desperation repels. Alignment invites. This is also where your standards sharpen naturally. You stop chasing attention from people who don't recognize value, not out of bitterness, but out of efficiency. You become selective without trying to be. You don't need to posture or withdraw dramatically. You just don't linger where you're not met. And that changes the caliber of interactions you have across the board, not just romantically. People treat you differently when you treat your own time like it matters. If you're thinking right now that this sounds like a lot of work, you're right. But it's honest work. And honest work compounds. Every adjustment you make toward alignment makes the next one easier. Every habit you solidify strengthens the signal. Every area of your life you bring into coherence reduces the need for explanation. And eventually, you reach a point where you're no longer hoping to be seen. You just are. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about removing the gap between who you think you are and what the world can actually observe. That gap is where frustration lives. That gap is where resentment grows. That gap is where men get stuck, telling themselves they're misunderstood geniuses while living like background characters. Closing that gap doesn't require ego. It requires courage. The courage to be evaluated. The courage to be clear. The courage to let reality respond to you honestly. If you've stayed through all 5 chapters, you already know this wasn't entertainment. It was confrontation. And if something in you feels exposed instead of inspired, that's a good sign. Exposure is where change starts. Subscribe if you want to keep pushing this pressure inward instead of avoiding it. Not because I'll motivate you, but because clarity is addictive once you stop running from it. At the end of the day, nobody owes you recognition for what lives only in your head. The world responds to what's real, visible, and consistent. When your exterior finally tells the same story as your interior, you stop asking to be seen. You start being undeniable.